Well, welcome back to the Leadership Podcast. I know it's been a while since we've done one. We've been concentrating on the Victory Podcast, the Flourish Podcast, but we're going to kick off the Leadership Podcast back, and I am joined by our founding pastor, my pastor, Pastor Larry LaFleur, and we got a different setup. Hope you like it. We're going to make this one all about dialogue, but tell me what you just told me right before we started rolling.
Yeah, I was saying this at one time was my office, and this is where we started our first leadership training. I'd come in early every morning. I'd study some John Maxwell, make an outline, and we'd come in an hour early so we could study leadership. So the first thing we did every day was the guys would come in. That would have been, I guess, over a period of time, Mel, Rick, Jody, and they would sit here. I would sit back here against this wall behind my desk. And that was our first
full
leadership
circle.
training. Full circle.
Full circle. Yeah. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is we were talking about some stuff yesterday, and there's some leadership lessons that, of course, I learned from you. I've been around now coming on 24 years. I've been around and been on staff for close to 20, and so leadership has always been a big part. That's why we started the Leadership Podcast. But one of the principles that you've taught me is basically the organization is only as good as the leader.
Right.
And that's why we believe that the Leadership Podcast is so important in growing as leaders. And if you want to look, and this is what I told Pastor Larry on the phone earlier, was if you look at organizations, you look at churches, the church could have the same vision, the same building, but yet one church is not doing well and another church is.
Right.
And if you look at it, or one staff's not doing well, another staff is thriving. Most of the reason is it all comes back to the leader.
Right.
If the leader cares and is passionate and shows that, the staff will follow. So that's why we believe it's important to grow your leadership.
That's right. That's right. And it was the thrust of Jesus' ministry. I mean, Jesus taught leadership from the time his disciples showed up in his life.
Right.
He just constantly would teach leadership.
Yeah.
Because the church is probably the church and the military are maybe the two most leadership-intensive organizations that exist.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it's very dependent on good leadership.
That's good. Well, one of these principles that I would like to talk about is a principle that you taught us. Oh, man, I was probably 16 years old the first time I taught it because I was a guy here at the church who I wanted to do everything. I was very willing. My personality was almost too big for my britches. I got myself in a lot of trouble just because I was always the let's go for it and all that. And sometimes I didn't have the principles in my life to carry the passion that I had. And so you really took, I don't want to say a hold of me, but you really did. And you taught me a lot of things. And one of the first lessons I remember you teaching was you build on your strengths and under your weaknesses. Right. And that is something I've said, I feel like it's going to be written on my tombstone one day because I truly believe that. And the way that you explained it to me, you said, don't you want to be the best leader that you can be? You have these great strengths. You run really fast. Everything is, you're so passionate, but you also have these weaknesses. Right. Instead of ignoring the weaknesses, let's build under them so they're not so much weaknesses. So explain that whole principle.
Yeah.
Number one, did you come up with it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, because I had seen leaders make two mistakes. One was they didn't discover their strengths.
Okay.
And they tried to build on their weaknesses. And if you're trying to build on you have all these strengths that are laying by, and you're trying to build on your weaknesses, you're never going to reach your full potential.
Do you have an example of what that, like just a practical example, what somebody would build on a weakness?
One thing I've seen in the church world a lot is when people think ministry, they think ministry has to happen up on the pulpit. And so and there are people who have strengths that allow them to do that,
right? And
people who don't. Somebody said to me one time, they said, we were having trouble getting volunteers for the nursery. And they said, if we could find a way to house the nursery on the platform, we get plenty of volunteers.
Everybody wants the spotlight.
Yeah.
Right.
And but one of the things I found is that when worship became so important, there were people who just decided that they just had to lead in worship. And some people just didn't have those skills.
Right.
And I remember a couple of times, one particularly just determined, God called me to lead worship. And I said, if God called you to lead worship, He would have equipped you to lead worship. It's hard to tell somebody you just don't have a good singing voice, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And she just didn't have the strengths in that area, but she had another area where she was extremely strong in. And so I felt like I saw this woman abandoning her strength and trying to rise to her full potential in her weakness. And I finally said, "Look, I'm going to have to be blunt with you, and it may hurt your feelings, but if I let you build your entire ministry on a weak area in your life, you're never going to succeed."
And she's taking the place of somebody who that is their gift.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I was doing her a favor by saying, you are so good at hospitality. I'd have community prayer meetings, and I'd put her in charge of it. They walk in and they love the place because it was decorated. There was snack. I mean, she just knew how to make everybody feel hospitable. That strength is valuable. It's important.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to shout it from the housetops, but and so we have to find our areas of strength, and this is what Jesus did.
Yeah.
Jesus went to work immediately with his disciples, looking for their strengths. He, for instance, when he selected his first groups of disciples, he goes out where a fishing village is happening, and he goes along and he finds these guys who are washing their nets. And in the mind of Christ, I know what he sees because I see it too. The ships in the Bible, ships and boats are representative of ministries.
Right.
And nets are representative, well, ships are representative, let's say, of a church. And the nets are representative of the ministry within the church, the in-gathering ministry in the church. So he walks up, and there are these two guys who are passionate about clean nets. And they got the nets out of the boats, and they're cleaning the nets. They're not in the boat. They're out here off the side of the boat cleaning the nets and making sure those nets are clean. These guys have a passion for clean ministry.
Oh, wow.
And so they're going to be passionate about helping people develop morals and integrity in their lives,
Right.
and ingrain that in the ministry of the church. And they've got them outside the boat because those ministries are not ready to function in the boat yet. We got to get them cleaned up and ready. So it's just beautiful symbolism. But Jesus, with his spiritual eyes, saw these guys, and he saw strength in them. He goes a little further, and there are guys mending nets. Same thing. He sees these guys who are taking this ministry and building integrity into this ministry, binding the parts of this ministry together, building structure, just what you do, Brady, here, helping our ministry leaders build their ministry teams and bring the right people in and put them in place and bind them together. It's what our greeters do at the door. They integrate people into the body of Christ. And then he goes further and he finds them casting the nets. Well, there are the evangelists and the recruiters who are reaching out to the community. So he's just spotting the strengths in them. And if we go back, we don't have time to do this, but if we go back and we look at who these guys were and then go and read their writings, we'll find that the most pastoral of them are the ones who were cleaning nets over here. You know, and the leadership training is coming from the ones who are mending.
Well, that mending nets, I remember in 2005, I think it was 2005, where you did a whole 8-week staff leadership on net mending and the importance of it. And because we were looking at structure, and if you want an organization to grow, you have to have the structure.
That's right.
You have to have the steel in the foundation before you pour the concrete. If not, the building will collapse. Right. And so you always taught us about building structure. Right. And I look at that not just in ministry and in personal, but in me, me building my personal structure. Right. And so you taught a 6 to 8 week, every Monday morning mending net lessons. And you talked about how if you don't mend the nets, you may catch the fish, but the fish will fall out. You're going to lose them. Right. And that's one of the books we asked you to write, by the way. I don't know if you remember that. You should have already been the author of like 15 books. But anyway, that's another podcast for later. But let me ask you this. So build on your strengths under your weakness. Yeah. What's the danger of not? So we did the example of the person wanting to serve in their weakness, but what's the danger of totally neglecting your weakness and only focusing on your strength?
That, and I've seen that happen too. You can build such a beautiful ministry on your strengths, and then fail so miserably in one of your weak areas that it wipes out. It neutralizes the entire ministry. Jesus. and that's the second mistake. The first mistake is people trying to build only on their weaknesses. Second is they fail to strengthen their weak spots. And your weak spots don't deserve all the attention.
Right.
Most of your attention goes on building on your strengths, and you build the bulk of your ministry on your strengths. But you've got to build under those weak spots as well. Jesus did this with Peter. He at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus says to Peter, "Who do men say that I am?" And Peter says, comes up with the revelation, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus congratulated him on that and said, "There it is, Peter.
Right.
That's what I'm going to build my church on.
Yeah.
The strength that you have of receiving from the Father, hearing from the Father, and receiving this beautiful revelation, and identifying this the bulk of the gospel built around."
Right.
So he congratulated him on this strength. But then later he said to Peter, he said, and he was pretty firm with it. He said, "Simon, Simon, Satan wants to have you so he can sift you like wheat."
Yeah.
Now, sifting is wheat has this congruous. I mean, it has a tendency to hold together in a lump, and sifting disseminates.
Right.
And Peter, he's essentially saying, "Peter, your problem is you have trouble getting along with people. You don't play well with others, and the enemy has found that weakness in your life, and he's going to try to exploit that weakness and disseminate you from the other believers." Peter he and John had this jealousy thing going on, and then he and Paul later on had their confrontations, but he said, "I've prayed for you." See, now he's talking about here's how we're going to work on your weakness. He said, "I have prayed for you, and when you come back to me, there's a little hint that your weakness is not only going to separate you from the body." He's talking about his denial.
Yeah.
But he said, when you come back, then you can strengthen your brethren. So he said, when you recover from this, you're going to get kicked around because of your weakness. But when you recover, you're going to strengthen the brethren. Or look at it this way, you're going to strengthen the brotherhood.
Oh, wow.
You're going to bring this back together, and you're going to become an integral part of the body.
You know what I love? So what I took from that is you have to have some spiritual authority in your life to sometimes point out those weaknesses, because your mirror that you may be looking in could be fogged. You ever seen the picture of the little cat and he looks in the mirror and he sees a big tiger? But sometimes maybe that's how we see ourselves, is like, no, I have no weaknesses, or no, my weakness is this. I think that's why it's important now, and this is not popular anymore. Spiritual authority is not popular because it was abused, it was misused. We've talked about that over and over, but true spiritual authority is needed in a believer's life.
It is.
And especially in a leader. Call it mentor if you're a business person watching, maybe you're not in church, but it's a mentor, somebody who can point out the blind spots that you can't see. It's called a blind spot because you don't see it. I guarantee Peter didn't see it.
Right.
Because he saw his passion.
That's right.
He saw his zeal.
Yeah.
He probably didn't see like, oh, I have the tendency to deny the one guy who I'm following. And so he needed that spiritual authority in his life, which is what I believe a real leader always has a leader. Right. Somebody to say, hey, watch this.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So.
That's right. And he right up to the very end, he kept saying, "I'm not gonna fall away. I'm not gonna be the one." And he was the one.
Right.
But then Jesus goes back, and as soon as he comes back, and Jesus meets with them after his resurrection, he reaches specifically for Peter. "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes." And he let him renew that commitment to him. But yes, there has to be spiritual authority. But see, the Apostle Paul talked about we have lots of teachers. We don't have many fathers. Fathers are the ones who have that authority,
right,
and who can speak into your life. And if they have that fatherly relationship, that fatherly attitude, they can help you recognize your weak spots. Yeah. Without sweeping your legs out.
What I would love to know, like, because I study leaders, I love to look at the people who mentored the leaders we all respect.
Yeah.
Like Maxwell talks about his leader, or Dale Carnegie talks about that leader. And so realize those are the guys that don't get the spotlight, but they had such a crucial part in building those guys to be who they were. And so everybody who you see as a leader, whether it's an athlete, everybody has a coach. Everybody has that father figure to go, hey, you're doing this, watch it, because it's out of love. Because a father will do it out of love. Yeah. Because the father's not self-serving. like in the sports world, I'm not going to mention names because this may go out, but there's some professional basketball players and their dad built them just so they could make it to the NBA, so he could make the money off of them. Well, his retirement plan. But a true father, it's all about the kid. It's all about, I'm going to put my resource into you to help you be everything you're called to be.
That's right. Yeah, Sidney Fontenot was an important mentor in my life, and Sidney pastored. I actually pastored a church after him.
Okay,
and he that was his idea all the time. He's grooming me for it. I didn't know, and so after he backed out, and I took the lead role. At that point, the church did some good growth. We built a building. It's a new building and relocated, and it was a period of real good growth. And so I asked him to come and do the dedication service at the new building. And he, at that time, Muhammad Ali was world heavyweight champion.
Not Cassius Clay. It was Muhammad Ali at the time.
And so Sidney, in his remarks, Sidney said, he said, I pastored the church here before Larry, and he said, I was Larry's mentor. He said, what he did here, I wasn't able to do, but he said, Coach Dundee is not able to get in the ring and perform all these knockouts, but he coached the guy who did.
Right.
And I thought, what a wise observation of what his role was in my life. And I want to be that to my family. I want to be. I want to be the. To become the foundation for the next generation. So
well, I think you've already done that.
Well,
so
good.
I hope you continue to do that because I do think it's very important because it is in the world of TikTok and YouTube, everybody's an expert in these one areas, and every time I see it, I'm like, are they building under their weaknesses?
Right.
And that is not fun.
Right.
Because it's a weakness.
Right.
But as a sports guy, as a guy who coaches baseball and wrestling and everything else, there's like right now I'm all into triathlon, so it's swim, bike, run. And if you're weak in one area, like when I first started training, I was so weak in swimming. Like I could not swim across the pool one time, like a 15-meter pool. Yeah. Now I'm actually teaching people how to swim in the pool correctly with the high elbow and the right catch and this and how to streamline.
You're looking for their weaknesses.
I'm looking for the weakness.
Because their greatness is going to come by fixing their weaknesses.
Right. And so, because what do they always say? You're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yeah.
And I want to be, at the end, I have this how can I say it? I don't want to call it a fear because it's not a fear. But I have this overarching thought in my mind. And I'm not going to say every day. I'm not going to exaggerate. I wish it was every day because it probably helped me in my life. But at least once a week, I have this overarching theme. And I go, when I get to the end of my life and I'm there and I'm going to look back and God looks at me, is he going to say, well done?
Yeah.
Did I do everything that I was meant to do? And because I remember being like in 7th grade or 8th grade, it was like the first leadership teacher I actually had. And they talked about what's full, there are dead dreams and visions at cemeteries. If you want to see the most depressing place to go to a cemetery, and how many dreams are buried there that they never accomplished because they never grew. And that just is this overarching thing of my life is I have one life to live. I want to make it count, especially who we are as ministers. And even if you're not a pastor, you're still a Christian, and you're called to be a little Christ. You're a follower of Jesus, and you're to represent him on the earth.
Right.
That is the ultimate calling.
Right.
That is our ultimate calling, not just pastoring, but that is our ultimate calling. How can you not want to build on your weakness to be everything that God's called you to be?
That's right.
And how many people are going to follow in your legacy because of what you did? Like,
that's right.
That's my overarching thing.
Yeah, we pastors, in terms of medical care, we're the general practitioners. We're not the specialists.
Right.
And so we have to be able to touch all those areas in people's lives.
Yeah.
And we have and as leaders who are grooming younger leaders, and that's where I am and where you are now. You have to be quick to spot. It's been said that pastors are like gold prospectors. We dig through a lot of dirt to find a little bit of gold.
Prospector. Yes.
When we find that gold, our
Right.
job is to refine it, separate it from the dirt, refine it, and make. Now, there's a difference between gold prospectors and jewelry shoppers.
Oh,
Some leaders only want to be jewelry shoppers. They only want the end product. But I love the process of building people and building and helping refine the gold. Jesus was so fast that when Nathanael walked up, he said, "Behold, an Israelite indeed in whom is no guile."
Right.
He saw it immediately. He said, "I can count on this guy.
Right.
There's not a dishonest bone in his body. If he says it, I can believe it. I can make a pillar out of this guy."
Yeah.
And then he said, "How did you know me?" He said, "I saw you.
I saw you under the fig tree." Yeah.
And he was so taken with that, and Jesus made it about face, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to have to show." Now, Jesus wasn't just bragging when he said this. "I'm going to have to show you a lot of greater things than these, so that you can marvel." I think what Jesus spotted was, he's an honest guy. He can be counted on, but he's too impressed with small things. He's going to have bigger vision. So I'm going to have to show him some great things. So he immediately picked up the strength and the weakness.
Yeah.
And now he knows that, okay, where I'm going to have to work on this guy, I'm going to have to teach him about great
Yeah.
things.
Wow.
And when you can pick those things up, boy, you can start immediately grooming your sub leaders.
I think this is so important. Like, I'm going to be 40 here in the next couple of months, and I still feel like the 19-year-old running around this place, to be completely honest with you. But when I look back and go, the last 20 years went like that. And I know the next 20 are going to go like that as well. And so I think this is about making every day count. You said that we've always said this when it comes to the quote about build on your strengths under your weaknesses, is you have two choices as a leader, business owner, pastor,
That's
whatever.
right.
You have two choices. Either you do this or you hire your weakness.
That's right.
Which could get really expensive, and then you're not growing as a person, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
Because if you're not growing, you're dying.
That's right. That's right. And hopefully that time will come, because he came with us. When we started the church, God spoke specifically to Janie and me. He said, "I want you to be at the head of every new thing you start here." And so we got involved in the beginning of everything. Even when we started the nursery, when we started the children's ministry, started the youth ministry, we got personally involved with it. And what God was doing was first of all, he wanted everything. You know, I like to cook Cajun food, but I use the same medley of seasonings in sauce piquante.
The Holy Trinity.
Fricassee, and then, and it's all going to have the same flavor. Well, when you do that, when you do what we did, the ministries will all coordinate, because they're going to have the same flavor.
Same DNA and all of it.
Same DNA and all of them. But eventually, we hired somebody to take those ministries. And it wasn't but a few months before I realized that person already knows more than I do about this ministry.
Which is what you wanted.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so those were areas where I wasn't as strong in as I was that lead pastor role. And so these people came in who had strengths where I had weaknesses. And pretty soon their strengths took over my weaknesses. So now we began to have, so then we were hiring our strengths. So stage one was having to do all those things ourselves and make sure our weaknesses didn't crater the whole project. Yeah. And then eventually hire to cover our
absolutely. What's an example of a weakness that you had to learn to build under? By the way, these podcasts aren't scripted. I don't know if you know that. These are just whatever.
I'm picking that
when you brought notes, I'm like, you're not going to need those. So what's one of the weaknesses that you can remember?
I hate to reveal this, but I'm very
we won't show anybody.
I'm very unorganized.
Really?
I fly by the seat of my pants a lot. And so the people who followed me had to be able to put organization into what I could not teach them how to organize their ministries.
Gotcha.
I taught them principles, and then they put those principles together in an organized form. And I'm watching the guys right now, the staff members right now, do the same thing. I'm watching them take their strengths, supporting the areas where the rest of us have some weaknesses.
Well, I'm a guy who did serve under you for many years. Who this is right when we were trying, just to give some clarity, we were trying to change a little bit of the production world of our church. We went from the overhead projectors to. I remember the first time we installed the projector in the old building, and we were using the presentation with trying to get your scriptures in there. It was 2002 when we did that. We thought we were so cutting edge. And then we moved in a new building. We're like, all right, we need your notes ahead of time.
I knew that was coming up.
That was so hard to get, because at 9:30 you would send your notes, and it's like 30 minutes before service.
Yeah.
So you made us run, but it helped us because it grew under our weakness to be able to work on the fly. So your weakness built ours. See,
and y'all didn't hammer me too bad for it. So I appreciate that. I've thought about that a lot.
But I couldn't get so mad because I remember one time I was telling Bobby this because he was on staff with us at the time. And I told Bobby, I'm like, I can't get mad at him because I do the same thing. I don't like to know what I'm teaching until like 30 minutes before. Like I changed my messages so much. So the youth staff used to get mad at me because I was doing the same thing. So, and I was like, I'm just doing what my leader does.
Yeah. I literally put myself, I knew I was going to preach, but it was all, I was spending the week internalizing it. Then on Sunday mornings, I'd put it in paper, put it on paper and hurry and ship it to
email that was good times back in the day. But one of the weaknesses that I had a lot of them, I feel, because I didn't get called into the principal's office a lot here, but there was just little things that was like, hey, just watch this. And it was always done in love from you and from Pastor Rick. But one of the ones that I was told was, Brady, you're a jerk to people. I will never forget that conversation. And I was like, me? I'm an extrovert. What do you mean I'm a jerk to people? Like, no, you run over people. You run over people to get the job done. And remember, the people are the job, not what you think the job is. And that was a paradigm shift for me. That was like, okay, I really need to grow. That's why we started the small group at our house before Victory had small groups again, was because I really felt the Lord say, you need people in your life. You need to live people because you're not nice. And I had to learn how to become a community guy. And now I can't imagine my life without people coming over to our house all the time. And so it's like I was an extrovert, but also an introvert. Like I want my quiet time, but now it's just like, oh yeah, come on. Like
perfect example of building under your strengths. And you put in the energy to build under your weaknesses, rather. You put in the energy to build under your weaknesses, and it really has paid off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't imagine doing the job I do now without that.
Right.
So if I wouldn't have, number one, if I didn't have the spiritual authority that I had with you guys back in the day, I definitely would not be doing the job I'm doing today. There's no way to do an executive pastor job and be a jerk to people. You just can't do it. And so it's not always so spiritual. Sometimes it's just like, hey, be nice, smile some. And the other one that you used to teach me, and this is, if you're a leader at our church, please do this. You always used to say, Brady, slow down, walk slowly through the crowd.
That's right.
And I'm like, but why? I have somewhere to go. Because my dad taught me, you walk fast. Yeah. And I still do. I still walk fast, but now I'm shaking. My dad still walks fast. But now I shake hands as I go, and I pat people in the back, tell them, no, hey, I'm going somewhere, but I still got time for you. And that's one of those other weaknesses that I had to grow in. So practical, just very practical
stuff. That's where we miss it. Is in the small stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just slow down and understand, because if you go so fast, people can't follow you. Right. And you can't blaze a trail. What's the old, is it Korean guy? Sam Chan. Who's the?
Sam Chan.
Was it Sam Chan who said 10 steps ahead, 3 steps ahead makes you a leader, 10 steps ahead makes you a martyr? Yeah. And so I remember that quote that you told me. And that's probably when it was like, hey, slow down. So any last thoughts about growing under your weakness or growing under strength?
The thing that I want pastors and leaders to recognize is how powerful their strengths are, what the potential of their strengths are, because so many pastors underestimate their own strengths and underestimate what God can do through their strengths, and somehow if you see your same strength in somebody else, you'll appreciate it in them a whole lot more than in yourself.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because you won't identify as much. But if pastors would recognize that the vision that God put in them is way bigger than their assessment of their own strengths, and really,
wait, say that again. Say that
the
slow.
vision that God has given them is way bigger than their assessment of their own strengths.
Oh wow.
And if you don't understand what God is capable of doing through your strengths, through what He's put on the inside of you, you'll pare your vision down to what you think you can accomplish, instead of let that vision be what. That's when Paul said in Ephesians 1, he just went through all that beautiful language about the spirit of wisdom and revelation and the knowledge of him, to recognize what first thing was the hope of your calling.
Yeah.
People know what their calling is. So few people recognize the hope of their calling. We pursue our calling. What is my calling? What is my calling? We find our calling and we try to follow it all of our lives. But the phrase is that God would show you the hope of your calling, or what is the end result of what my calling is going to look like. And that takes revelation, because you're going to look at yourself and look at that revealed calling and say, I'm not big enough to reach that calling.
Wow.
It takes a revelation from God to look at that calling and say, God in me is big enough to reach that calling. And if pastors would recognize the fact that there are so many pastors whose churches are undersized and their ministries are undersized. I'm just talking about numbers. I'm talking about the scope of their ministry is undersized because they underestimate the hope of their calling. They don't recognize what God can do through them if they'll release themselves to God.
Wow.
And walk in it.
Do you think the way to get that is maybe to just, I don't want to say think bigger, because I don't want to make it that simple, but is it how do you get over that? Like, what's the solution of that?
I had a mentor early in my walk. When I moved, I was baptized in the Holy Spirit in Panama City, Florida. And the guy who was our mentor there, his name is Terry Yates. And Terry said to me, one of the final things he said to me when I was about to leave, he said, Larry, remember, your ministry is not going to get as big as you. It can get as big as God. And that stuck in me. Somebody with authority who knew me and knew my faults said that to me, and I picked up on it. And that was in about 1972.
Wow.
And to this day, that is echoing in my ears. Your ministry can get as big as God, because it's dependent on the anointing of God on your life, not your assessment of your talents and abilities.
Wow.
And so, and that's why it takes the spirit of wisdom and revelation and the knowledge of Him.
Yeah, absolutely. That's more than just going to take a personality test.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's looking deep within who God's created you to do.
It is.
And I think to protect that is don't compare. Because
Right.
I believe comparison is the thief
It is.
of joy and a thief of a life lived in your strength. Because the danger of the comparison is, so if you stand next to me, and let's say I stand next to my son Brecken, who's a foot shorter than me, well, I can look at Brecken and go, oh, look, I'm bigger than him, but then you're taller than me. And then all of a sudden I look to this way and it's like, oh, now I'm nobody. And so if I'm comparing, it's like,
That's right.
I can't compare my gifts to somebody else.
That's right.
Because all it's gonna lead me to do is not be grateful.
Yeah.
Because it says rejoice in all things, and one of the things I believe that we should rejoice is how God made you.
That's right.
He made you specifically do what Larry LaFleur could do. Nobody could do with that,
That's right.
and no one can do what I can do because there's only one Brady. I mean, there's a lot of Bradys, but only me specifically. Yeah. And so if I'm trying to be you, I can't make it.
Yeah. And everybody's treasures are so valuable to the kingdom. But and one of the reasons that a lot of leaders never function in their own strengths is because they try to pattern their ministry after somebody else who has different strengths.
Right.
And so they end up trying to imitate this guy over here.
Yeah.
And his strengths, and they don't have the strengths for it.
That's right.
And so that keeps them with a lid. They're always going to be at least second best to this guy.
That's right.
And so we can't compare ourselves or our ministries to anybody else. Everybody has peculiar treasures in themselves. And I'll tell you, part of the when you're observant enough, part of the privilege of ministry is uncovering those treasures in their lives. For the last 6 years, Jody has taken the lead role, and watching Jody's giftings that are different from mine, watching them emerge and watching him do things that I could not do because we have different giftings has been wonderful.
Okay, but this is a truthful podcast.
Yeah.
How hard was that at the beginning?
Well, after 2 years of depression, for stepping down from the lead role, I was okay. That was hard in the beginning because I was doing the reverse. I was comparing him to me,
Right.
and we have very different personalities, different approaches to ministry.
Yeah.
But his giftings are far better for where the church is now than mine are now. But my giftings were better before for the building and establishing of the church.
See, the transition of you and Jody is the same time period I was transitioning between me and Felix.
Oh, yeah.
And so the same way that you were probably feeling about Jody, I was feeling about Felix.
Yeah.
I think Felix is a great youth pastor, but he wasn't me.
Right.
I had different giftings than he had, but he had different giftings on the relational side that I had never had.
Yeah.
I never had kids invite me to their baseball games.
Yeah.
They never called me Father Brady.
Because you were a jerk.
I was a jerk, exactly. Because honestly, what the gift was, I felt was a youth communicator. It was the message, and like really motivating and being passionate on stage was something was in me, that was just put in me. And so the relational side, I'm like, oh, I'll get the staff to kind of handle that. And that's whenever it was like, hey, no, you need to put this in. So, but now looking how much we did this strength and weakness thing with Felix a couple of years ago. Maybe I need to get him on the podcast to talk about it. And we just said, hey, where you at on on a scale from 1 to 5? Where you at on this area, this area, this area? I can honestly say in the last 1.5 to 2 years, Felix has grown under his weaknesses.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, okay, 6 years ago, if I would have been like, he can't do the job.
Right.
He's not me. Look, our youth group is bigger now than it was the last 3 years of my youth ministry.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if we would have cut it short and not allowed people to grow under the weakness, then we would have stifled ourselves.
That's right.
And then we would have been back doing all the jobs ourselves.
And let them be themselves. You don't want to make them a carbon copy of you. You need to let them be themselves.
So there's all type of leadership nuggets in this, because whenever you hire somebody to do something, let them be them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think about Trey. Trey Broussard. He owns Angelico Construction. He's got a lot of good guys under him now.
Yeah.
But he can't micromanage a Hunter.
That's right.
He's got to allow Hunter to be Hunter, and he's got to allow Allen to be Allen. And if not, then all you got is a bunch of little Treys running around.
Which is a gift that he has.
Right.
His ability to let people be themselves is a gift, and it's bringing him to success.
We can't give him too much compliments
Not
right
too
now.
much.
No, just kidding. So, but hey, thanks for joining. I think this is a lot of good
pleasure.
practical things with some spiritual nuggets put in there. But we just want to encourage everybody, find your strengths.
That's right.
Have a spiritual mentor, a spiritual father in your life who can point those things out. And don't wait for somebody to go say, hey, I want to be your spiritual mentor. Don't wait for that, because I don't believe that's how Jesus did it. Jesus went, hey, come follow me. That's how Elijah did it with Elisha. But I didn't wait for that. The conversation I had with Pastor Rick, I don't know how he didn't like condemn me whenever I told him. I said, I never forget, I went in his office. This is right whenever I became the assistant youth pastor. First time on staff, I went up to him and I said, hey, by the way, I'm going to be better than you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to take everything you know, which is everything your dad knows. I'm going to combine it with what I already know, and I'm going to be so much better than you. He's like, great, I hope you are.
Yeah.
And that's when you talked to us about, you didn't want us to start over. You want us to be able to stand on your shoulders to go up. And I was like, okay, that's what it's all about. So so find you a spiritual mentor.
And look at how Elijah and Elisha did it again.
Elijah felt the power.
Elisha walked by, threw his robe, threw his mantle over him, and let him feel it, and then just walked on. And Elisha said, whoa, wait a minute, let me go say my goodbyes. And Elijah essentially said, do whatever you're going to do. Yeah. He just let him feel it and then walked away, because the mentee, the follower has to make the prodigy has to make a commitment to that.
Absolutely.
To that relationship.
Well, again, thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed the leadership podcast. Can't wait to get on the next one. I may have one of the other staff members, and we may do a case study with another staff member and do the strength and weaknesses and all that stuff in here, so they can actually see us doing it.
See that one.
That would be good. Who should we choose? Should we do like spin the bottle, and whoever it lands on, cast lots? Should we?
let's avoid that.
Okay. Pick some straws.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Do you have somebody who we should do?
Oh, I don't know.
I think of Jess. Jess is behind the switcher right now.
I wasn't gonna say it, but
Well, Jess is behind the switcher switching right now, so I think he's going to be the guy we dissect in the next
he's the
podcast.
new guy. Yeah.
He's the new one. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for joining. We'll catch you on the next one.